there's really, to me, a big difference between, vegetarian, raw food, vegan. Vegan is not a way of eating only. It's really a whole consciousness of approaching life from a standpoint of doing no harm. So not only is it a food program, but it's a program where you don't get involved with harmfulness in any way, shape, or form. So you're not using animal-based clothing. You're not using animal-based upholstery. You're not feeding industries that are based on animal violence and killing. And so to me, vegan is a more all-encompassing philosophy of which plant eating, raw food eating are one part of that dance, but that's not the whole dance. So as far as your question, I think we need to be eating an abundance of raw food, but I don't see where people are harmed by eating some cooked carbohydrates. And I find that sometimes that makes the diet a little bit more open-ended and amenable for people. So if they can have sweet potato or lentils or beans or things of that nature, but still having an abundance of raw vegetables and raw fruits, I think that kind of rounds out the diet a little bit more. But just to understand that vegan is not just an eating plan, it's an entire consciousness of living that is something that I've been part of for a long time. And I mean, if you think about it, I think it was Sailesh Rao who said that we use over 280 million tons of animal parts for upholstery and clothing and things of that nature. So even if everybody just stopped eating meat, those industries would still rely on animal killing. So it's not just a food issue, it's an entire encompassing issue that covers so many aspects of our, socioeconomic status in our culture.
And it's not only a lifestyle issue, it's a spiritual issue. It goes on
Oh, it's
every
all,
single
I mean,
level.
it's all of that. You can't, when you have industries that are based on violence and killing, you can't expect to eat death and foster life. You can't expect to really have a spiritual relationship. To me, let me redefine spirituality in just one simple way, because I want to take it out of a religious realm, because there's a difference to me between religiosity and spirituality. The religions, all the religions, the world religions have their own rituals, their own belief systems, they have their own sacraments, their own way that they worship. And everybody should have that right to do that in any way, shape, or form that they want. Spirituality to me involves much more of our concern and consciousness about how our individual choices affect everything around us. So to me, that means the repercussions of what we're eating are not defined by just the boundaries of our own individual kitchens. They're involved with the sacrifice and killing of billions of animals around us. They're involved with devastating changes in the environment and climate. So when you make a choice for food, what are the consequences of those choices? And the more you are conscious of the impact you have on the world and life around you, that to me is a more spiritual consciousness. So to me, this way of living, vegan, raw, all of those things, they feed that spiritual consciousness. They feed that idea that, yeah, I need to be more aware of how I'm affecting the world and people around me. And this is really the crux of this. And that's where the whole idea of empathy, compassion, and love is really the foundation of this way of living. What I'll call, what regardless of your religion, it's kind of a Christ consciousness, that empathy, compassion, and love. And to me, that's the foundation. And those are the highest ideals of human behavior and consciousness. And they're supported by this way of living.
With that idea of your spirituality, as you said, would you suggest that a person that eats and supports the killing of animals is less spiritual than somebody who doesn't for that particular?
Well, I'll say the choice is less spiritual, because I don't like to define people necessarily just by their choices, because we're human beings that have so many nuances. But the choice to me is a less compassionate and less spiritual approach, because whether you're doing the killing or not, because that's one of the arguments. Well, I'm not doing the killing. I'm just eating something that was already killed. You're feeding industries that are based on that kind of abuse and harmfulness. And people need to realize that these industries are brutal. I mean, these foods don't make it to your plate without remarkable brutality and violence. And so at some point, I think we have to question, how we're eating in relationship to the repercussions of that kind. So to me, it would be a less spiritual choice in my definition.
But you said you don't like to define somebody based on their spirituality based on their choice, but that's exactly what you're suggesting.
Well, in a way I am, but the fact of the matter is, if you think about it, if I'm going to come from a place of empathy, compassion, and love, I'm going to have to come from that place, regardless of what someone chooses, because that should be my a priori philosophical bent. So I'm having a little bit more, if you will, a little bit understanding that everybody is on a path of evolution, and where you are may not be where you actually end up or where you could actually be. And so I try to respect people for where they are, even if I don't agree with those choices, and try to share information that may help them see things perhaps in a different way. But ultimately, if you keep making choices that are grounded in violence and killing, you have to question the spiritual path that you're on, in my opinion.
So with that outlook, I mean, we could take it to a level of even a mother who smokes in her house. Is she committing violence to her children because she's supporting the early onset disease through secondhand smoke? I mean, it's
Yeah, I mean, she may be ignorant and unconscious of that. So, the bottom line is, I'm not going to fault her for being unconscious. But the fact of the matter is, yes, you are potentially harm. I mean, I grew up in a household with both parents smoking. So, all the secondhand smoke, they weren't trying to harm me. But at that time in the 50s and 60s, nobody really quite grappled with the idea that this was such a devastating habit. It was just starting to become aware. So the key is, yes, you have to look at, and it's the same way that when you look at parents putting food on the plates of their children, how are you feeding these children? Are you harming them? Are you getting them onto a path of harmfulness and so on? So it's a question of, intent is an issue too. So to me, if you are thinking you're doing the best for your children, but yet it's an ignorant choice based on disease and violence, then somehow that has to be rectified. And if someone can help educate you or help move you in a different direction, that would be awesome. The key to it all is that we're on a path of evolution and growth and change. No one is fully realized and no one is perfect. So, in our imperfection, that's where empathy, compassion, and love come into play. I'm still going to love a person in front of me as a human being, even if I disagree with their choices. But if I feel they're harming themselves and harming others in the process, I want to try to share information that may help them become more aware of that. If I share that information and they continue to make those choices, it's out of my hands. I mean, it's not anything that any of us can, we can't control the choices of other people. We can only control the choices that we make. And that's where change begins at home, in our own personal lives.
you spoke about ignorance and also education, and I believe the majority of the world has no idea how bad and unhealthy, and also the killing that's taken place in factory farms and in the animal consumption and using animals in particular products because of the education. For example, maybe in the 70s, they didn't have this big ad campaign to say smoking was so bad. But thankfully now they do. So some people, a lot more people today know smoking's not healthy, so it actually stops people from smoking because of the
Right.
education out there. But when it comes to the consumption of animals, we're actually taught that it's actually not only bad for us, that it's actually good for us. So it's ignorance that people are doing this, not necessarily they're looking to harm their children or others, but they're told that it's actually good to do. So it'd be more ignorance than less spirituality. Because even when they're told, like by me and you, that it's bad, they're listening to the same people that
Yeah,
are.
no, and that's why I try to separate ignorance and spirituality a little bit, because the truth is, but when you look at it though, if you go back to the 70s and some of those earlier decades, the interesting thing is there have been so much information and so many studies that have now indicated that eating in a more plant exclusive or plant-based manner does help resolve a whole range of health issues. So I think more and more people are aware of it, but it's still intriguing to me that even with that increased awareness and you have, lifestyle medicine and all of these pieces, the fact that we're still killing trillions of animals a year, it's unbelievable to me that even with the information, because the fact of the matter is the ignorance to me is not as widespread as it used to be. There is more information on environment and health and this and that. But the fact of the matter is that we still have 73% of the American population overweight or obese. We still have in that population in the age range of 2 to 19, in that age range, it's almost 40% obese in our children, which means the responsibility is on the parents. And there's about 38% of people between the ages of 12 and 19 that are pre-diabetic with the adult, more mature onset form. So it's intriguing that with the information we have, we still see these pandemics of obesity and diabetes and heart disease when we have enough information that no one has to suffer with those problems. I mean, think about that. We know enough in nutrition and lifestyle right now that no one has to really suffer with heart disease, type 2 diabetes, or obesity. And yet, those are global pandemics across the world.
Well, the problem is, we know big business runs most of this, and people are making money. So, yes, the campaigns and the information and education has been popularized to show people how important and good a plant-based diet is. But at the same time, the meat industry and the dairy industry and all these industries, they up their campaigns also.
No question about it.
And they
No
also
question.
have Hollywood and the popular YouTube videos uh, promoting the high animal protein lifestyle, the unhealthy lifestyle in general. Fat is good and healthy. And on top of that, people that are doing the vegetarian diet, most of them, or a really good amount of them, are not doing it in a healthy way and ending up sick. So if I'm here as somebody who's not looking at studies and just looking at listening this on YouTube and seeing vegetarian people that are sick, it's gonna lead me towards with all this education. Hey, this makes more sense. So that's really confusing to people out there.
Yeah, again, but like I said, all you can do is, spread information. That's all you can really do because you can't change people. And you're right. The industries rely, the food processing industries, from the animal industries to the processed food industries, rely on people being absolutely addicted to those foods. So the addiction process has been established actually going back to the 60s and 70s. People don't realize that back in the late 60s, the food conglomerates like Kraft and General Mills and all of those companies that sell a lot of processed food, they, at that time, interestingly enough, they were trying to find a way to make meals more palatable for soldiers in Vietnam in the late 60s. So these companies hired what were called food physicists. One of the famous ones was a guy called Howard Moskowitz. And what their job was to find out what they could add to foods that were being sold commercially to make them the most attractive to the greatest number of people. And they realized that the things that you would add to do that were three things. One was salt, one was sugar, and the other was oil. And so what they discovered is they said, what are the amounts of those things you can add to food? And they called this, they actually used this phrase to create the highest bliss point that would give people the greatest amount of pleasure. Then they realized they could add one thing to that would make it even better, and that was crunchiness. So from the early 1970s, that assault of processed food with salt, oil, sugar, and then, of course, many preservatives came into play after that. But the fact of the matter is, the game was running from that point to addict as many people as possible to buying those processed food products. And of course, meat and processed meats have their own additives and their own chemistry. You take something like uric acid in meat, it's got a chemical structure similar to caffeine. So it creates a stimulating effect. So you get this stimulation and you get all. What people don't realize is that whenever you get a response in the body, even if it's stimulation, as much as you've been stimulated, the body has to then crash. So when you crash, you're looking for more of that stimulant, and it just reinforces what people like Alan Goldhammer used to call the pleasure trap. I call it a pleasure prison because it's more than a trap. It's literally a prison that people are imprisoned. So this idea that the new guidelines are trying to get rid of additives and ultra processed foods, I applaud them for that. But the fact that they're still feeding the meat and dairy industries is really reprehensible. And this idea that we're going to come back to blasting people with protein. In the new dietary guidelines, they recommended an increase of protein of 50 to 100% from what the original guidelines said. That's a lot. That's quite an increase. And people don't realize that excessive protein can be linked with everything from kidney disease to heart disease to cancers of various kinds. So, we're exaggerating protein again. We're exaggerating it from meat and animal sources. And you're right, it's confusing to people. It's confusing to the person who's looking out there saying, wow, I thought eating plants was really the way to go. I'm starting to think that way. But now I have to rethink this because the government is now telling me that, boy, I better up my game with animal protein foods.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show. Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show.